This is the story of a cold case, frozen in time for nearly 3 decades. It's a case that was only solved because one detective, driven by the unwavering love of a victim's sister, refused to let it go. This is the case of Karlin Strom. Our story begins in Woods Cross, Utah, a quiet city nestled beside the vast, shimmering expanse of the Great Salt Lake. Here lived 25-year-old Karlin Strom. Outgoing and beloved by her friends, Karlin's life seemed full of promise. She had been a high school sweetheart, marrying her first love, Steve, right after graduation. Like many young couples, their first years were filled with happiness. But as time wore on, the sweetness soured. Cracks began to form in their marriage, and after 3 or 4 years, the life they had built together became unbearable for Karlin. She decided to separate from Steve, moving in with her stepmother. It was a painful time, but Karlin was looking toward a new future. She had no idea that a terrible fate was waiting for her, just around the corner. Let's go back to June 5, 1980. It was a Thursday, and it was Karlin's birthday. A few days earlier, her estranged husband, Steve, had called. He wanted to take her out for a birthday dinner to talk, maybe to patch things up. With their wedding anniversary also approaching, Karlin agreed. That evening, they had dinner together. Afterwards, they returned to the home they once shared. Steve worked the night shift at a factory near the lake, from 12:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. After resting for a bit, he left for his shift, leaving Karlin to spend the night in the house. The next morning, at 7 a.m., Steve finished his shift. He picked up the phone at the factory and called home to wake Karlin up for her own job. But there was no answer. He tried again, and again. Still nothing. A knot of worry began to tighten in his stomach. This wasn't like Karlin. Fearing something was wrong, Steve clocked out immediately and raced home. When he arrived, he first checked the kitchen, looking for a note, any sign of where she might have gone. He found nothing. Then he walked to the bedroom. He pushed the door open and froze. The scene before him was one of horror. Karlin was on the floor, face up, her neck covered in blood. Terrified, Steve grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Police arrived within minutes, but it was far too late. Karlin Strom was gone. Investigators began to process the scene. Karlin was in her pajamas, her feet against one wall, her head near the corner of the bed. There were clear ligature marks on her throat, along with scratches on her neck and arms. The bedroom was in disarray. Blankets and sheets were torn from the bed and thrown on the floor. Pillow lay nearby. The television had been knocked off its stand, its screen still glowing, the power cord still plugged into the wall. The bed itself was made of brass, and 2 of the bars on the headboard had been knocked loose, with one lying completely on the floor. It was obvious a violent struggle had taken place. Strangely, the rest of the house was untouched. The back sliding door was secured from the inside with a wooden rod. The front door lock was intact. No windows were broken. Police concluded that Karlin had either let her killer in, or the killer had a key. The scratches on her arms were defensive wounds. She had fought for her life. The killer had ultimately overpowered her, strangling her with their bare hands. The initial theory was clear. This was personal. This was someone Karlin knew. Investigators started interviewing friends and family. They quickly learned about the turmoil in Karlin's marriage. When questioned, Steve admitted that he and Karlin were having problems and had been separated. But he claimed they were trying to reconcile. He said the birthday dinner was a big step forward, a sign that their relationship was healing. But Karlin's stepmother told a very different story. Yes, Karlin had agreed to the dinner, but she had no intention of getting back together with Steve. In fact, she had told her stepmother that she was planning to use the dinner as an opportunity to officially ask Steve for a divorce. Her stepmother had even tried to talk her out of going, but Karlin insisted. It was just a meal, she said. It wouldn't change her mind. Suddenly, Steve's motive grew exponentially. He wasn't a grieving husband trying to reconcile. He was a desperate man about to be served divorce papers. When police confronted Steve with this, his story took a shocking turn. He told them he knew who the killer was. It was Karlin's new boyfriend, a man named Buff. Steve claimed Buff was jealous that he and Karlin were getting back together and had killed her in a fit of rage. So, police brought in Buff. He was fully cooperative and insisted he had nothing to do with it. He said he loved Karlin and she loved him. He just wanted her to be happy. In fact, he told police he had actually encouraged Karlin to give Steve another chance if that's what she truly wanted. This was backed up by Karlin's friends and family. They all said Karlin was unhappy with Steve, but when she was with Buff, her face would light up with joy. They believed the jealous one wasn't Buff. It was Steve. And crucially, Buff had a solid alibi for the night of the murder. He was cleared. Just as the investigation was zeroing back in on Steve, the coroner's report came in. Limited by the technology of 1980, the medical examiner couldn't pinpoint an exact time of death. Based on the digestion of the food in her stomach, they could only provide a window, sometime between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Steve's shift started at 12:30 a.m., but he'd clocked in late that night at 12:45 a.m. The drive from the house to the factory took about 25 to 30 minutes. This meant it was possible for him to have committed the murder right before leaving for work. His co-workers said he seemed perfectly normal that night. Not nervous, not agitated, nothing out of the ordinary. With the pressure mounting, Steve threw out another name. His co-worker and good friend, a man named Owens. They were hunting and fishing buddies. Steve told police that Owens was acting suspicious. Owens worked the middle shift at the same factory, so he would have been off duty during the time of the murder. When police brought Owens in for questioning, they immediately noticed something. His arms and face were covered in small scratches, exactly the kind one might get from a victim fighting back. But Owens had an explanation. The scratches on his arms, he said, were from metal shavings at the factory, a common occurrence which his boss confirmed. The ones on his face, he said he'd hit his head on a piece of equipment while bending down. As for his whereabouts, Owens claimed he was at a bar with other co-workers from 8 p.m. until the bar closed at 4 a.m. His friends backed up his story. Police could find no real connection between Owens and Karlin, no motive for him to harm her. So he too was cleared. But, following standard procedure, police took hair and DNA samples from Owens and photographed his injuries before letting him go. With both of his alternate suspects cleared, the investigation circled back to Steve. He had a motive, no alibi, and his story kept changing. The county prosecutor felt they had enough. An arrest warrant was issued, and Steve was charged with first-degree murder. In December of 1980, the case went to trial. But every piece of evidence against Steve was circumstantial. There was no smoking gun, no definitive proof. The jury found him not guilty. Steve walked free. For Karlin's family, the verdict was a devastating blow. The case went cold, officially becoming another unsolved file gathering dust. But Karlin's younger sister, Coco, refused to give up. Finding her sister's killer became her life's mission. Years turned into decades. In 2006, 26 years after the murder, Coco walked into the police department, just as she had done countless times before, asking for an update on her sister's case. The answer was always the same, no new leads. But this time was different. A detective named Todd Benson was moved by Coco's relentless determination. He pulled the old case file and began to read. The more he read, the more he believed it could be solved. He requested permission to officially reopen the investigation. In January 2007, his request was granted. Detective Benson started by re-examining every piece of physical evidence from 1980. His eyes landed on the victim's fingernail clippings. Back in 1980, DNA technology wasn't used in criminal investigations. But now, in 2007, it was a game changer. Benson sent the clippings to the lab. While waiting for the results, he decided to call one of the original persons of interest, Owens. When Owens answered, Benson identified himself. "I'm Detective Benson. I'm reopening the Karlin Strom case, and I have a few questions for you." The reaction on the other end of the line was immediate. Owens's voice trembled. He became evasive, dodging Benson's questions. The detective's instincts screamed that Owens knew more than he was letting on. Soon, the DNA report came back, and it confirmed Benson's hunch. Under Karlin's fingernails, the lab found a mixture of DNA. It belonged to two men, Steve and Owens. Benson then asked forensic experts to reevaluate the time of death using modern techniques. By analyzing the original records of body temperature and cooling rates, they established a much tighter window. Karlin had died around 12:30 a.m. Steve had clocked in at 12:45 a.m. With a 25-minute commute, it would have been impossible for him to commit the murder at 12:30 and still make it to work on time. For the first time in 27 years, Steve was essentially cleared of being the hands-on killer. But what about Owens? He had an alibi. Benson went back and re-interviewed the coworkers who were at the bar with him that night. They all remembered drinking and playing pool with Owens, but no one could say for sure that he was there the entire night. It was possible he had slipped away for a while and returned without anyone noticing. Benson then pulled up the 1980 photos of the scratches on Owens's body. To his modern eye, they didn't look like they came from machinery. They looked exactly like fingernail scratches. The evidence was pointing squarely at Owens. Benson decided to bring him in for another interview. But he was too late. Owens had vanished. He'd left a note for his wife saying he was never coming back. He had fled. Credit card records tracked him to San Antonio, Texas, and then across the border into Mexico. The case had hit another dead end. But in March 2007, there was a break. Police received a tip that Owens had run out of money and was forced to return to the United States. Detective Benson got his phone number and called him immediately. "I have enough evidence to get a warrant for your arrest," he told him. "I suggest you turn yourself in." With nowhere left to run, Owens surrendered to police. He was charged with first-degree murder. As he sat in jail, another ghost from his past emerged. In 1972, a woman named Kimberly was attacked while walking on Hermosa Beach in California. A man had brutally beaten her and tried to strangle her to death. She fought back and managed to escape. The attacker was caught. It was Owens. At his trial, his family provided an alibi and he was acquitted. Now, decades later, it seemed his violent past was finally catching up to him. But Owens wasn't going down without a fight. His family hired a prominent defense attorney who came out swinging. The lawyer made a stunning claim. The DNA found under Karlin's nails wasn't from skin cells scraped during a struggle. It was from semen. He argued this wasn't a murder, but a case of sexual assault that went wrong. As for fleeing to Mexico, the lawyer claimed Owens was just visiting a friend in Texas and took a short trip across the border for fun. He only learned he was a murder suspect after he got there, at which point he decided to return. The argument, though flimsy, was enough to create doubt. The evidence was still too thin. The prosecution dropped the charges, and Owens was released. Detective Benson was devastated but not defeated. He went back to the evidence room, laying out every single item from 1980, examining them one by one over and over again. He had the items photographed and digitized, allowing him to zoom in on every thread, every fiber. And then he saw it. On one of Karlin's articles of clothing, there was a tiny, almost invisible reddish dot. It looked like a speck of blood. Could this be the piece of evidence he needed? He sent it to the lab. The sample was decades old and incredibly small. The chances of getting a usable DNA profile were slim. But a few days later, the report came back. The lab had done it. The drop of blood belonged to Owens. This was the irrefutable proof they needed. In March of 2009, Owens was arrested again. This time, the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with a mountain of proof, Owens finally admitted his guilt. On May 21, 2009, at his sentencing hearing, the case took one final, shocking twist. Owens stood before the court and made a confession no one saw coming. He said that while he was the one who killed Karlin, the entire plot was orchestrated by her husband, Steve. Owens claimed Steve had approached him months before the murder, asking him to do it. He said Steve had recently taken out a life insurance policy on Karlin and promised Owens half of the payout, $50,000, if he went through with it. Steve, he said, gave him a key to the house. According to Owens, he let himself in that night not to kill Karlin, but to warn her. He told her Steve wanted her dead and that she needed to run away and never come back. But Karlin didn't believe him. She screamed at him to get out. An argument erupted. It turned violent, and he ended up strangling her. Steve, of course, denied everything. Police confirmed the existence of the life insurance policy. It was a standard benefit from his work, but they could find no concrete evidence linking it or Steve to a murder-for-hire plot. Without more proof, they couldn't press charges against him. After a 2-day deliberation, the jury found Owens guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. After 29 long years, the case was finally closed. But a shadow of doubt remains. We know who committed the physical act of murder. But was he acting alone? After the trial, a reporter interviewed Karlin's sister, Coco. Over the phone, she said, "I know the man who physically harmed my sister is in prison. He did it." As for whether Steve was the mastermind, Karlin's tombstone reads, "Only God knows."